You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Beit Shemesh Israel 5777, 2017. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Shemos. It's the beginning of the book of Exodus, and we have the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, the Torah's description of the life and times of the Jewish people in their time in Egypt as they were slaves, and how Hashem instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to come and to redeem the Jewish people. Now, I'd like to focus in on a very specific point in the Parsha, very interesting point, beautiful midrashim, that speak about the relationship of Moshe and Aharon. Two brothers, Moses and Aaron. God speaks to Moshe and says, go and speak to Paro, to Pharaoh. And Moshe says, I can't do it, I can't speak, I have a speech impediment. Hashem says, don't worry, I'm going to send you alongside your brother Aharon. And it's very interesting to observe their relationship throughout the Torah, but very specifically in our Parsha, Hashem tells Moshe, you don't have to worry, I'm going to send you to be the leader, to be the redeemer of the Jewish people, to be Mashiach, the Messiah of that generation. And Aharon is not going to be jealous of you. Aharon is going to be happy for you. And we see a remarkable thing, that besides Hashem telling Moshe to go back to Egypt in order to redeem the Jewish people, we also see Vayomer Hashem, this is in chapter 4, verse 27. Vayomer Hashem el Aharon. God spoke to Aaron. Aaron was also a prophet. And he said, Lech likras Moshe hamidbar. I want you to go out to the wilderness where Moses is as he's coming in. I want you to go out to greet him. And the verse finishes off. Vayelech vayifkesheu bahar Elokim vayishaklei. He went, he met him at the mountain of God, meaning he went to Har Sinai, to Mount Sinai, where in the future God would give the Torah to the Jewish people, and he kissed him. It's very, very interesting. The Torah tells us about this interaction between Moshe and Aharon, speaks about their love, speaks about the command of God to Aharon to go out to the wilderness where Moshe was, and speaks about the kiss. Now listen to these amazing midrashim. Hidden within these midrashim are amazing, beautiful, deep ideas that I'd like to share with you. It says like this. Vayomer Hashem el Aharon lech lekras Moshe hamidbar. Midrash quotes the verse that we just said. Hadahu dichsiv. Midrash says like this. This is what the verse means in Shir HaShirim. In the Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 1, it says, Mi yitencha ke'ach li. Would that you would be like a brother to me. Speaking about the love of Hashem to the Jewish people. And halavai, we wish that we could have that brotherly relationship. Now the Midrash wants to understand, not every brotherly relationship is necessarily a good relationship. What kind of brother are we speaking about? We find a brotherly relationship which wasn't so good. Cain and Abel. We find that brothers can kill each other. What about Yishmael and Isaac? They didn't have such a good relationship as well. They were brothers. We find that our Chazal explain the stories of what went on between Yishmael and Yitzchak as being stories of negative interactions. In Tamer Esav Yaakov, speaking about Esav and Jacob, Haksiv Vayistam Esav es Yaakov. We see that their relationship wasn't good either. In Tamer Ka'achi Yosef, what about the brothers of Joseph? Vaksiv Vayisnu. So the verse tells us that they hated him as well. Vaksiv Vaykanu Bo Yaakov. Verse furthermore says that they were jealous of him. Ella, so if you want to know what kind of relationship are we requesting, the Jewish people are asking of God, be like a brother to us. It's referring to the relationship of brotherhood between someone like Joseph and Benjamin. Their relationship was pure love. Yonek Shadei Ime, as the verse refers to these brothers as two people who suckled at the same breast. They had the same mother, and therefore their relationship was a unique and special relationship. Now we need to understand, as the Eitz Yosef points out, that Binyomin never actually suckled from his mother's milk because Benjamin, as he was born, his mother Rachel passed away. But we refer to them in this way because of the fact that they were both from the same mother, as we explained. Now, it's important to understand, though, what is the idea behind this, that they suckled from the same breast? What is that idea? What is the depth of that idea? We'll see soon, but it's very connected to the following. That we see the Midrash also says, besides for Benjamin and Joseph, besides for their relationship being an ideal brotherly relationship, we also have another relationship, Moshe and Aharon. We have the relationship between Moses and Aaron. Shenemar, the verse tells us, Vayelech vayifkesheu bahar Elokim vayishaklei. he went out to the mountain of God and he kissed him. So we see that there was a special relationship between them. But what's interesting here is that when it comes to Moses and Aaron, what is the thing that binds them? It's not the fact, although it's true, it's not the fact that they both suckled from the same milk, but rather it's the fact that they kissed each other. The midrash goes on to speak about different kisses and what are the real kisses, which instances within Tanakh refer to proper types of kisses. Moshe and Aharon are an example of a proper type of kiss, the type of kiss which represents a true relationship, which represents something real. The end of the midrash says something amazing about this kiss. The verse also says in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs, Emtsa'acha b'chutz eshakcha, which literally means, I will find you outside, I will kiss you. So the midrash darshans, be'ezeh chutz, which outside are we speaking about? Bamidbar, we're speaking about the place which is outside of the regular inhabitation, which is a reference to the wilderness. Makam shenashku achim zelazeh, Moshe Aharon. The place where God finds us, or the place where we find God, so to speak, is out there in the wilderness, in the place where Moses and Aaron kissed. Now I want to understand, what is the idea of this kiss? What is the idea of the midrash that says that if you want to meet God, if you want to find God, or you want God to find you, you need to go to that place where Moses and Aaron kissed? What is the idea of that? And also, how does it connect to Yosef and Binyomin, that brotherhood that they experienced, which is described as Yonik Shadei Imi, that they had the same common place where they suckled and received their milk? How do these two ideas connect? So before we answer these questions, I'd like to direct your attention to another midrash, which is a little bit farther on, but is also based on this pasuk. We're in Parsha Hey, and we were just reading from the first section. Now we're going to skip to the 9th section, where it also quotes the same verse. God spoke to Aaron and said, go out to greet Moshe in the wilderness. Now the midrash says here something amazing, and I'm going to share it with you out of order, because the midrash will oftentimes quote a verse which the midrash wants to use for us, teach you something different in regards to something else that's along the same lines, that has a similar idea, and then come back to us. But I'd like to first start with the teaching that has to do with our verse, and then bring it back to the other teaching which the midrash brought along the way. Hadahu dichsiv, the midrash says, this is what it says in the verse, in Job, chapter 37, verse 5. Yarim kel b'koil niflois. God with his voice shall thunder out wondrous things. What are these wondrous things that God thunders out? What's so wondrous about God's voice, so to speak? So the end of the midrash says like this. Amar Rav Ruvain. Rav Ruvain said, B'shash amar la'akadosh baruch hu l'Moshe b'Midyan. When God spoke to Moses, when he was still in Midyan, and he said, Lech shuv Mitzrayma, I want you to go back to Egypt. Nechlak hadibur l'shnei kailos. This statement of God broke down into two separate voices. V'nasa du partzufin, and had two different faces. V'yam Moshe shomea b'Midyan. Moses was back in Midyan, and he heard, Lech shuv Mitzrayma. He heard the words, go back to Egypt. At the same moment, Aaron shomea, Aaron heard the same voice, but it said something different. It said, Lech likras Moshe Amidbara. Go out to Moses into the wilderness. Have yarem kel b'kol niflois. This is the meaning of the verse, which speaks of the thunderous voice of God which does wonders. The wonder is, the amazing thing, is that God can say one thing, and clearly we need to understand what this means, but God can say one thing, one undifferentiated statement, and two different people will hear at the same time that statement and understand how that statement affects them and what they are meant to do. Moshe will hear, go to Egypt. Aaron will hear, go meet Moshe in the wilderness. Now here, an amazing thing. The midrash says that this is not the only place where we see that Hashem spoke in a way which was undifferentiated, and different people heard different things. We find this elsewhere. Rabbi Yochanan said, Hoya hakol yotzei. This is speaking about in regards to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. When God gave the Torah, so it wasn't just received by the Jewish people. The Jewish people were not the only ones who had a spiritual revelation at that time. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Hoya hakol yotzei. The voice came out, v'nechlak l'shivim kailos. It was split into 70 voices. L'shivim lashain, 70 languages. Kidei sheyishmu kol ha'umais, so that all of the nations would hear. The kol ha'uma v'uma shamas kol b'lashain ha'uma. Each of the different nations would hear in their own language what was going on, the spiritual revelation. Now, the Jewish people received the Torah, received the spiritual revelation in a different way than the nations of the world. When it came to the nations of the world, when they heard this revelation, their souls went out of them. They were unable to withstand it. The Jewish people could hear it, and they weren't damaged by it. Very similar language to what we saw before in regards to Moshe and Aharon. How would this voice come out? Reb Tanchuma said, "Du partzufan haya yotze." It would come out in two different ways, two different faces. It would come out and kill the idol worshippers, those who didn't have the ability to receive it. Sheloi kibluha. They had not received the Torah. Like we know, the famous midrash that God went around to the nations of the world and asked each one of them, will you receive the Torah? They asked them what's written in it, etc. They weren't willing to receive it. They weren't able to receive it. So the Torah itself, its spiritual force, caused them to die. It's not clear if this is literal. Maybe it's referring to the Egyptians, the death of the Egyptians, or maybe it's, as the Yosef explains, it's not literal. It's perhaps a spiritual death. But the idea is they were not able to receive it. V'nosen chaim l'Yisrael. But the same voice which destroyed the nations, which destroyed the idolaters, the Jewish people heard it and it gave them life. Shekiblu es Torah, because they received the Torah. And the midrash goes on to say that each person received the Torah, whether it was an adult, whether it was a child, whether it was an elderly person, whether it was a man, whether it was a woman, whether it was Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Each person received that voice. They heard that voice. They heard that sound, that spiritual message. It was tailored to them. They heard it according to their very own way, according to their koach, according to their spiritual ability. So Hashem spoke with a certain voice. Hashem said a certain all-inclusive type of statement, and each person heard that which applied to them, and each person received that which they could receive. Also very interesting, and I don't want to get into this at length, but it's very interesting that the midrash says that the manna had the same characteristic. The man, also, it was a food that it had an all-inclusive taste, and depending on the individual, depending on their status, depending if they were a tzaddik, whether they were young or whether they were old, the Torah has a few different descriptions of the taste of the man. And each of these different descriptions, it depended on the person who was eating it. In the same way as this voice comes out and is heard differently, so too the food of the manna could be tasted differently depending on the individual and their ability to receive. And as we read this, we need to understand, what is the idea of this voice? What is the idea that there's one sound, there's one voice, that it's heard by two different people differently? What is that idea? What is the midrash coming to teach us? Also, how does it connect? Why is it being taught in the same verse as we learned all the ideas that we spoke about in regards to the kiss, in regards to the brotherhood of Moshe and Aharon? What is the idea? What is the connection? So I just want to read one more piece from the same midrash, which also, as we read it, it's difficult to understand at first, but there's an amazing depth to what's being taught here by our Chazal. It says like this: Mahu Yarim. What is the idea that God thunders with His voice these wondrous things? When God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai, with God's voice, He expressed to the Jewish people unbelievable things. Ketzad. What does this mean, or how did this occur? God would speak, the voice would come out, and it went around the entire world. At first, the Jewish people heard this voice coming from the south, and they ran to the south in order to receive and to accept this voice. But then, instead of coming from the south, when they got there, it started to come from the north. So then the Jewish people were so anxious to hear the voice of God, they ran to the north. But then, when they got to the north, so it started to come from the east. The Jewish people ran to the east. Again, after they got to the east, it switched and it started coming from the west. They ran to the west. All of a sudden, it switched from being in the west to coming from the heavens. And then they looked up to the heavens. Then it came from the earth. And they looked down on the earth. Shenemar, as the verse says, this is in Devarim in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 36. God sent out His voice to be heard by you from the heavens in order to test you. And so after this whole entire situation, after running here, running there, trying to hear God's voice, so the Jewish people were saying to each other, which literally means, from where will we be able to find wisdom? But it also means me'ayin, the word me'ayin, which means from where, can also be translated as from nothingness. Hold on to that thought. And so the Jewish people were saying, where is God coming from? Min ha-mizrach, min ha-darim, is it from the east? Is it from the south? Shenera Hashem mi Sinai ba. The verse refers to the fact that God came from Sinai. V'zarach me seir lamai. But then it speaks of the fact that God, He shines His light from Seir. So it's coming from different directions. The verse in Chavakuk says that God comes from Teman, which is south. So it seems the Jewish people were confused. They were trying to hear God's voice. They were running this way, they were running that way. They couldn't figure out how they could hear God's voice. They couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Where is the source of God's sound? Very perplexing midrash. What is it teaching us? What is the idea? What is the depth of this? That God's voice comes from one direction first, then from a different direction, from the four directions, from the heavens, from the earth. What is the midrash saying? What's the depth of what this midrash is trying to teach us? So in looking at the whole picture here of what the midrash is coming to teach us, I believe that what we're seeing here is that there's a spiritual revelation. God is about to redeem the Jewish people. God is about to reveal Himself not just in the redemption, but also in the giving of the Torah. The purpose of the redemption from Egypt was really that they should come to Mount Sinai. They should receive God's revelation, receive the Torah, which would serve them for all time as a bridge between the Jewish people and God. It would make that connection. So the subject here is God's revelation, God's redemption, relationship with God. How does one enter into a relationship with God? How does one access the redemption? How does one access the revelation? Both on a personal level and on a national level. So let's look carefully at the midrashim and go through it and see an amazing, amazing depth that the midrash is teaching us. First thing that we spoke about was the brotherhood. We spoke about Yosef and Binyomin. We spoke about the fact that they nursed from the same milk, and we spoke about Moshe and Aharon and their kiss. And the depth of what's going on here is that two children who were born from the same womb, two children who suckled on the same breast, means that these two people, Binyomin and Yosef, or Moshe and Aharon, share a common destiny, share a common root. And that root is so deep, that root is so special, and it binds them so tightly that they're true brothers. There can never be hatred or animosity between them. There's only love. And that love is expressed by the fact that they both suckled from the same milk. And interestingly, the same act of suckling, that same motion, that same movement of the mouth is what we see when we have a kiss. The kiss represents the fact that I want to receive. I want to show that I'm connected to you. If I give my child a kiss, it shows I am connected to my child. Two brothers kiss. The message of the midrash is that when the brothers kiss, it shows that they are both receiving milk, sustenance, spiritual guidance from the same source. They're both connected to the same purpose. Moshe and Aharon are brothers. They serve God. They serve the Jewish people as the team. Also with Miriam, which I'm not getting into now, but they are the team which brings about redemption. Hashem works through them to bring about redemption. Now notice, as the midrash said, that where does God connect to the Jewish people? Where do we find God, or where does God find us? Outside, bachutz. What is the idea of outside? That's the place of kissing. It's the place where Moshe and Aharon kiss. Important to understand, why did Hashem have to send Aharon outside to the midbar, to the wilderness, to meet Moshe there? Why couldn't he have just received him, greeted him in Egypt? There's something amazing here, and that is that in order to access this place, this root, this place where I'm kissing, where I'm receiving God's light, I'm receiving God's message, I'm hearing God's voice speak to me, hearing my personal role in God's plan, where does that happen? It happens when I step out, when I move out of my regular place, when I move out of the inhabitation, when I move out of all of the things that distract me from the truth. I need to step out. And just like Moshe and Aharon, in a certain sense, they were born of the same womb, which was a place where they were separated from the world. Yosef and Binyomin also have that aspect. Stepping out is the place where it's possible to kiss. Kissing represents the receiving, the willingness to receive, like the baby suckling. That's possible when we step out. Now let's look back at the second midrash, where we see that there's an undifferentiated voice. The same voice, which God really says, God's really saying, I want redemption to happen now. So now Moshe hears, go to Egypt. Aaron hears, go greet your brother in the midbar. It's the same voice. It's the same transcendent voice. It's a voice which is outside, which is the voice that's kailo. It's a voice that includes many different statements, and many different people will hear different statements depending on who they are. But it depends on their readiness to receive. And that's what we see from the difference between the Jewish people and the Umas Ha'olam and the Oivdei Chacham, the idolaters. They were not able to receive. They were not willing to receive. They hadn't puckered up, so to speak, to receive that milk. So the milk spilled all over their faces. It ended up destroying them. They weren't able to receive it. The Jewish people had prepared themselves to receive it. But the question is, how does one prepare themselves to receive the amazing voice of God, the awesome, thundering voice of God? And I believe that the first part of the midrash, which is the last one that I shared with you, is the secret to receiving, to preparing to receive. And that is, Hashem speaks to us from many different places. That's what the midrash is saying. First they hear it in the north, then they hear it in the south, and they hear it in the east, in the west, from the heavens, from the earth. What is this confusion? What is this? God is just sending them on a wild goose chase? No, that's not what this midrash is saying. The midrash is saying that God speaks to us from many different directions. God sometimes speaks to us from here. Sometimes God speaks to us through a gadol b'Torah, through a great Torah giant. Sometimes He speaks to us through a regular person. Sometimes He speaks to us through nature, through our experiences. But God's voice comes from many different places. And the Jewish people were willing to run wherever they believed they heard God's voice from. Now it seems like God is, so to speak, giving them the runaround, quite literally. But that's not true. The fact that they're running to receive is what makes them open to receive it, wherever it's going to come from. Sometimes it will come from this direction, sometimes it will come from that direction. And ultimately they say, that the wisdom can come from nothing. Because it doesn't just have to come from any direction. I can also be static. I can be sitting in my place, and God will direct me as well. But that's only possible after I've run in every direction. And by the way, if you think about it, this is the idea of the lulav. I'm not going to get into it at all. But the lulav, we also we move it in each of the different directions, always bringing it back to the center. This idea as well, being willing to do God's will, running in any direction in order to try to receive what God wants to give to us. The act of moving that lulav back and forth is receiving. Opening myself to receive. The Jewish people were open to receiving. And that's why each one was going to hear what God wanted to say to them. God said a general statement, I want a relationship with you. And each individual heard a different thing. What does my special relationship with God look like? What is my special mitzvah that's precious to me? What is my chelik in Torah, my portion in the Torah that's special to me? What mesechta can I learn that I relate to? That's going to be when I come after 120, I'm going to say, God, this is the mesechta, this is the tractate of the Talmud that was special to me. This is what my relationship looks like with you. What is that voice? Are we ready to hear it? Are we ready to run in any direction in order to hear God's voice? Are we open to receive? If we are, we will receive and we will get exactly the message we're supposed to get. God's voice will come down in an undifferentiated form, but will be differentiated for us as individuals. And we will know, if we are seeking, we will know what our individual purpose is and what our relationship with God looks like. But only if we're willing to receive. And how is the difference between the Jewish people and the idolaters who are not willing to receive, who are not willing to be open, who are not willing to change? That's Moshe Rabbeinu, that's Aaron. They kiss each other. There's no animosity between them. They don't see anything but their own purpose. They don't look at the other person and say, oh, I wish I had what he has. They're brothers. They come from the same mother, from the same womb. They suckled from the same milk. They recognized that each one of them had a special role to play, had a special taste to bring into the world, had a special role in the divine plan, in the plan of redemption. And there was no room, there was no necessity for there to be any anger or jealousy. There was no place for that. And that's the true brotherhood. And that's the brotherhood that we ask of God. We ask, please God, kiss me. Please God, show me what you want from me. I'm ready to kiss you, my God. I am ready to receive. I've puckered up. I'm ready to receive the milk. I'm ready to receive the guidance. I'm ready to hear your voice. I'm ready to eat that manna and taste whatever taste I'm supposed to taste. To have my relationship with you, God, which is unique to me, and to have my relationship with the world, to manifest in the world something which is unique to me. And I don't need to look at anybody else. Hashem should bless us. Hashem should help us to understand the depth of this teaching. Hashem should help us to have that kiss, have that love, have that recognition, have that willingness to receive, have that willingness to run in any direction in order to hear God's voice. Hashem should help us to indeed hear exactly what it is that He wants from us every day. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.